Welcome to this week's episode of Drop the Mic. Joining me today is the Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Communication at Spartanburg Methodist College, Danny Kambel. In this episode, Danny and I will be discussing the importance of leadership and how everyone can become a leader. Check it out. Danny, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to leadership, it can be a multitude of things, helping people out, and a lot of people can look up to you, like they rely on you. They expect the best for you so you can help lead the team. But leadership, it can have a multitude of things. But in your own definition, how would you define leadership?
I think leadership is defined in my area or in my life just as a compass, a person that will set you in direction, either in words or in actions, or just, sometimes it's even nonverbal or non-descriptive. It's very just how you carry yourself and giving you a chance to go in a direction towards objectives or goals or ambitions, depending on how you phrase it and the task. But also, I think sometimes leadership is also defined in just being nonverbal, like just by carrying yourself well, carrying a smile, carrying enthusiasm, carrying energy. But it goes back to just leadership is just a compass or a direction that you go towards in an objective or an accomplishment or a dream or an idea that you have.
Absolutely. And so when you stepped into that field of leadership, what encouraged you to become a leader?
I think I've been very fortunate to have a very strong core of leadership starting on the home front. Trying to be the person that I want to become as an individual, wanting to lead individuals and taking bits and pieces, but also just taking apart what we just talked about, exposing myself in areas, being around other people that by title were in leadership, but also just in responsibility and roles, looking at that as a model, I started my career at the U.S. Naval Academy. So seeing people of my same age leading peers, but then as you work your way up into administration or in lead, title responsibility, looking at them and saying what attributes do they have that I need to model in my role. So as I've evolved now for 25 years in college athletics, taking different people, I'm constantly reading, researching, looking at others, but never saying that person's I need to take that person on fully. They had to develop characteristics, develop character, develop skills, and taking bits and pieces and molding that into making me unique. I want people to look at me as a person that is just a microcosm of so many different pieces. Our body is made up in many different ways. So I have very different, bring in different pieces. If it's, my study of the Bible is something that's very important to my leadership, but also taking the study of people, adapting who I am to bring out the best in that person or in that responsibility to being the best and most successful leader I can become.
That's great because, and tying back to that, when you're trying to evolve, you always can't do it on your own. You always need help.
Correct.
So it's never that bad to just reach out. Just reach out to someone for help.
Yeah, and the thing I always look at about leadership is it doesn't have an age. I look at the college students that I work with on a day in and day out basis, that they provide leadership to me, but also they are responsible to follow what I'm so. So I feel like leadership doesn't have an age or just, you can't be in a position of leadership and a responsibility. I equip and educate and motivate our students to take on that same responsibility. Like I tell them early on in positions with me that you're doing the exact same thing I would be doing. I just provide years of experience, but they have the responsibility to take on ownership. But then also the affirmation, a pat on the back or a T-shirt or a shirt that a coach gives me to thank me for what I'm doing. That's just as much of a reward for them as it is me. But I want to give back that praise. I look at our responsibilities as I would rather give you 99 compliments. So when there is that one time that I don't, it kind of overshadows and overcompensates that, but it keeps you motivated. It keeps you, like it goes back to what I said in that first question about just providing that compass. I want to keep you going in a positive direction. we can take 3 steps forward. And if that we do take 1 step back, we still do have that 2 steps forward. Looking at things from that kind of mindset, because I think the more you build up, the small things are going to make the larger things very successful, both personally, professionally, but ultimately, like as we've talked about, in leadership from that standpoint.
And leadership is great because of like the impact you have on people's lives. That's just great about like the company. It's like the camaraderie you form, like the friendships, the impact you have on people's lives. It doesn't matter about like the title or
Correct.
your accolades or anything
Right.
like that. It's just the impact you have on someone's life.
Right. And that's why when I bring on someone to my team or my staff, that I tell them success isn't going to be defined by a scoreboard. We are trying to develop the best version of that person. So when I reflect back or think back of successful people that have worked with me and not worked for me, like that's what's will motivate us to go forward. I don't want to create 25 Dannys. I don't want 24 Dannys. I want the best Michael. I want the best Scott, or the best version of that person. Like I want to have that and be able to celebrate that. So when other things happen in life that we can celebrate, I am an often person that likes to celebrate the milestones or the accomplishments. If it's getting married, graduating with another degree, getting an A on a Spanish test, all of those are all pieces of how I provide leadership to them that the complex tasks that I may give them can be broken down very simply. And that's where we're going to achieve success. Because if you take those small pieces of success, then you do have, it's like opening your birthday present or your holiday gift or, things like that. It's that same joy. The scoreboard may not indicate a positive outcome for our team, but we had contributions from everybody on my team to be successful in an effort. If it's putting together, where we're at right now academically in a semester, we've been working towards things each and every day. And now we can start to see the results of that buy-in, but also they can celebrate that. They can go back and look at that and see how they've evolved. They don't come to me and know how to do something immediately, but also that's what's going to translate to them being successful in their future endeavor. If it's stay-at-home mother, being an entrepreneur, whatever that might be, that's what I'm trying to develop for them, is these small pieces of success that you have working with me will translate to future endeavors.
And throughout your career in collegiate athletics and athletics, how has being in the position of leadership impacted you?
I think the biggest impact I've had, it goes back to what you just asked before, seeing them evolve and develop into better people. I had a student athlete that got married over the weekend. I want to celebrate that with them. I tell people in my highest of highs, I'm there for them, but also in lows of lows. I have evolved as a person as a result of my involvement in their life. And that's where we can go forward. And I think that's what keeps me motivated, keeps me encouraged to provide that area of leadership. Is it doesn't matter what you did in 1999 when I first started to what you did here in 2025. We've evolved as people. I have now more tools that can celebrate that success. I can text them just as instantaneously. I'm able to see, people want to celebrate those things, but also to bring them alongside. Like I want to find them where they're at in their journey. It goes back to our first question of going back to being part of that compass. Like, hey, I can go back and ask Danny for questions or, ask him about things to bring on for future success as I've evolved as a leader. And I think that's what, when they come back to me, that helps me keep that direction for myself. And it's a two-way leadership role. It's not leading just by title. It's leading by experience, which is very important to me.
Leading by example, it's great. Like it would encourage the next generation, to do better, and then that can, spread more and more and more, and then everyone will be learning how to become a leader. Hearing about leadership, it's amazing because of the impact you have on people's lives. You can encourage them, motivate them, etc. But from your own experience and throughout your career, from 1999 all the way till now. Why do you believe that everyone can become a leader?
I think it's just how, we all have, different characteristics and different skills. It's learning how to celebrate yourself. I am a person that often wears a smile. I call that that would be like the trademark, or that's how I, from that standpoint, like having that energy, but also everybody has something that keeps them happy or keeps them motivated. It's that, childhood feeling of when you got your birthday present or a Christmas gift. That's what I want people to feel about leadership, is we can, the small pieces contribute to that. It all has we want that joy in our lives. We strive to be happy. We strive for success. We want the A in the classroom. We want to win the basketball game. What is it going to take? And that's what I feel about that correlates over to leadership. How you motivate, it's all different pieces. It's taking that small piece and putting that and repeating that over and over, but also knowing that it's something that somebody else is going to want to take away from you. So take pride, take ownership, take responsibility for that. Not everybody's going to see that as success, but if you do, that's what I look at when I look at them in leadership. I want you to take on that responsibility. I want you to carry on that energy, that enthusiasm. It looks very mundane or very boring for someone to see. Yes, I want you to be a leader while you're making those copies. It looks very boring, but the thing is, how that communicates information or communicates to the people you're serving. That's what, that joy is the same joy you got when you got your first bike as a kid or your first baseball glove. Things like that are what it brings that joy. Because just as much as the excitement of getting that baseball glove as a kid gave you a chance to, play a sport. Well, just as much as, hey, making that copy allowed that information to be transferred. And then it ripples out to leadership. Like, hey, now they know how important being in that position of leadership, hey, if I don't make this copy correctly, that's taken away that joy. That's competition for your leadership. It challenges you. It's somebody else. Can somebody else do that better than you? Well, you want to be better as a person, better as a leader, because when you've succeeded, you want that joy, you want that energy, that enthusiasm to carry out in your leadership going forward.
Now when you're in the position of leadership, a lot can happen. You're gonna carry a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna be involved in a lot of decision making, but some people may feel reluctant to become leaders. Why do you feel that people become reluctant to be leaders?
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, is that they want, they see that they don't want their name on it. They don't want to put their brand or their identity behind it. I think it's that shyness. It's why don't you ask that question? Why, because you haven't built up that energy, that enthusiasm, that passion in yourself. And I think that, knowing that one mistake is glorified or magnified, that's why people shy away from leadership or shy away from taking on a responsibility, because they know if they make a mistake, it has stole that joy or stole that energy, that enthusiasm. And that's what makes leadership so difficult, is that it takes longer to build it than it would on the other side, because people will quickly diminish. They're not going to always celebrate that joy, that energy. So when someone can just one piece pull it away, and that challenges you as a person, challenges your style, changes your approach to leadership, that's what makes it difficult. That's why you're reluctant to step into leadership as a role, but also just as in your position, wherever you're at, you're challenging yourself, because people are critical, people are negative, and you have to look at it like, why aren't you looking at the other 99 things you did well? And you think of that one thing, and then that ripples out the other way. And when you start to think of it that way, you're not going to want to be in leadership. You're not going to want to be in those kind of situations ever again.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So when it like people want to reach that first level of leadership, but some are reluctant to. Maybe some want to, but they're a bit timid.
Hmm.
How can people get involved in reaching the next level in leadership?
I think one of the biggest things is to surround yourself with people that believe in you just as much as you believe in yourself. I think that's a core to it. I've been very fortunate to have been at many different places in my life. I've been in lows of lows, but I go back to having that, I'll use as the sports analogy, the cheerleader, the coach, whatever term you want to use, someone that can pull me and identify those situations like we just talked about, those negative situations that can go back and say to me, hey, what did you do well? What can keep me motivated? What can keep me encouraged? I think that's the biggest thing, is in those times of timidness. Like, remember that before that person got to that position in leadership or that role, they had to sit in your same shoes. They sat in your same chair. They've had the same setbacks, but finding that person that can just kind of challenge you in those good times, but also in those bad times, that will provide, that goes back to that first question of providing that compass. Like, that will help you set your direction, but also realizing the magnitude. Like, learn how to celebrate the joys and the failures, because failure is a teacher, or weakness is a teacher. And I think if you take the mindset that you can learn from mistakes and not let the mistake repeat itself, you want to repeat your successes. So when you have failure or weakness, like, look at it and say, hey, for example, I know there's shortcomings I have. I will read about it. I want exposure to it. I want to be coached. I want to be taught. I want to be motivated. And that's one thing I think in leadership, you do the same thing. Like, hey, not everybody is motivated the same way. You cultivate and create a pattern that you want to repeat, because we do repeat a lot of our actions. Like, that's what I look at my role in my current position. I'm repeating a lot of behaviors, but I'm repeating behaviors that are doing well and success. But when I do have a failure, what am I doing to counteract that? Where do I find help? If it's find accountability, that person that we talked about at the very beginning of the question, but also finding, hey, how does somebody else, look at other individuals, realizing that I'm unique. There's only one Danny Kambel walking the face of this earth. I don't want 3,000 people like Danny Kambel. I don't think the world needs that. The world needs the best version of Danny Kambel, and learning what that looks like and making sure that, hey, all 3,000 people that want to be like Danny Kambel can create something unique and special. And then that's where their direction. They have that accountability from another person, but also not our society, how, like, taking in different sources to keep them going in that direction for positive leadership, positive responsibilities in their day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Like, every step you take, it just all takes a simple step.
Mm-hmm.
When you take it one day at a time, and if you just continue to create, to just go at it, like, just make progress every day, it can kind of lead to your destination. Like, you can reach your full potential.
Agreed.
Like, it literally brings your goal into fruition.
Mm-hmm.
But to the person out there who may feel like they're in the position of leadership, but kind of feel reluctant, what would you say to the person out there who doubt themselves as a leader?
Just going back to, like I was saying earlier, about just kind of identify what are your strengths, because there's something that you can contribute to everyone. We all have a skill. We all have a talent. We all have an ability that someone else doesn't have. And I think cultivating and creating how that will kind of carry into leadership. The way you carry yourself, the way you express yourself, the way you write about, the way you communicate, if verbally, non-verbally, the way you interact. All of those contribute to leadership. The best leaders sometimes don't say a word, but they carry themselves with an attitude or a belief in themselves. Be able to contribute that, like, be a part of the success, being a team member, being bought in, contributing, knowing that, hey, not being negative, being all in. The whole idea is when everybody starts to see your action, they're going to want to catch, why does this Joe or Jane have that energy, that enthusiasm, even though they're not in that role of leadership. They are contributing to leadership for themselves. They have to have that motivation, that kind of energy, and being, give 100% to being involved. Listen, learn, listen to learn and listen to follow from that standpoint, rather than listening to lead from that standpoint. And I think that's where you take away your shyness or your timidness or your reluctancy to wanting to be in that leadership, because I think the best teams have those pieces of the puzzle, because if you're not going to, you're hurting the organization or the operation or the effort by being negative. You're pulling away the energy, the positive, and I think engaging in that role will take away your timidness. And then obviously learn to lean into your strengths. Knowing what you contribute is beneficial. And silence, non-participation, that's where you're impacting leadership. And obviously getting all those pieces of the puzzle. So that's what makes leadership unique, is you do have those kind of environments or those people or those situations that are like a silent.
Great. Awesome, Danny. Now, when it comes to going, going towards that next step in leadership, what is one action? What's the next step that people can take? What is something that they can begin now?
That's a good question. I think I'll speak just from a personal standpoint. I think it's just the whole idea of just setting that goal for yourself, setting that compass, but not putting the end goal, the end result as the most important piece. Identifying the smallest piece of it you can. Like I was talking with someone yesterday, just the whole idea of knowing the metric. For example, you want to increase something by 1%. You look at how much 1% is of a whole thing. 1% can be very significant. And I think that's what you have to do in these situations, is find that 1% and keep that 1%, because the more you multiply that 1%, that's when you get to 100%. When you get to the negatives, and I'm not a math professor in any shape or form, but I don't think people want, you don't want to go in the negative direction. So when you give 1% better, and then that all starts to add up. So look at all the variables and how can I do this 1% better? Because 1% better is better than zero or nothing. And I think that's where you start to make the biggest change, because there's things in my life I can look back at and say, I did this 1% better than I did it yesterday. That's success. That's going to make me a better person, professional, husband, and I think that's what our society needs from, looks at my role, is I have to be 1% better than I was yesterday. And I have to learn from those times when I was zero or not going in the positive direction. But I also have to be vulnerable to accept that I wasn't and know that I didn't go the right direction. And I have to lean on people that are going to push me in the right direction. If it's my coworkers, my colleagues, my friends, my family, I need to look at them to help push me that 1%. And that's what's going to make a difference when I am timid or I'm shy or I'm sitting in the room and not saying anything. Why did I keep myself away from going 1% better?
Preach. Well, Danny, it's been fantastic having you on. Where can the people connect with you so they can learn more about you and your work?
Obviously, I'm a student of social media, so I'm very active on social media channels. LinkedIn at Danny Kambel, same thing with X/Twitter at D Kambel. I do, and one last thing is I also do Monday through Friday a blog that just is geared towards helping people find that. Goes back to our first question about the compass. I put in there just different thoughts that come to mind. Yes, I correlate a lot of it to sports analogies. We talk about leadership, motivation, but it's also just, it could be geared towards a job seeker, but I think it goes back to just our life. Finding that one, we just talked about that 1% better. But also interactions through, if reaching out to me, I would foster any kind of communication, collaboration, because we can all make a difference in each other's lives. You know, I tell people that even a person who sat by me on an airplane is someone I have not seen that person since that plane ride, but we celebrate our birthdays around the same time. We have constant conversations because I never know when that one person can make a difference in my life. And that's what I want to be, is that one person that can make a difference. If it's a smile, it's an email, it's a phone conversation, it's a text message. That's how we can all make a difference in each other's lives in leadership and beyond.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure of having you on, Danny.
Appreciate it, Michael.
And that wraps up this episode of Drop the Mic. I am your host, Michael Uzor. This is Danny Kambel. And if you like this type of content, make sure to give it a like and also to subscribe and turn on the bell and notifications on so you never miss when I upload a video. Well, that wraps up this episode. Make sure to take care of yourself and each other, and we'll see you soon.